That's the website, as Mike was saying there. So you can go to this one here, academyofchiropracticnutrition.com, and just put your details in, and that gives you the weekly newsletter. As I said, so I send out some really good content, information, tips, a little bit of banter, and also along with that, you'll get there's a vitamin D symptom and dosing chart, which I'm going to show you in the presentation. That will be sent to you automatically, and also on this presentation, I'm not going to go over any mechanisms behind or any great detail about why vitamin D does what it does. I've done that in a separate video, so today I can keep it more clinical, and you have access to that video as well. Plus, I'll go over some case studies as well. So that's the website. Also, if you need to get hold of me, you can do so through my personal consulting website. So if you have anybody you think may benefit from a more dedicated functional medicine approach, I do online consulting Tuesdays and Fridays. You can get hold of me through integratedcare.co.uk. Okay, so when it comes to nutrition, for me and my 3 days a week as a chiropractor, I'm not doing nutrition just for the sake of nutrition. There may be some people who want health and wellness and all sorts of other things, but most of them are coming in with some kind of neuromechanical issue. So for me, I'm interested in the interface between the neuromechanical world that I live in as a chiropractor and how that is overlapped with the metabolic world and how it affects my ability for my treatment to take effect and to sustain. So I'm really interested in results, not theory. If you have metabolic dysfunction, and in particular, if you have systemic inflammation, that typically makes people's fascia and muscles, they get very fibrotic and scarred up. And that systemic inflammation leads to neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation will make your peripheral, make your nerves and central nervous system hypersensitive. And that typically means you get persistent pain, persistent dysfunction, and the inflammation also will drive mood and behavioral problems, commonly depression, anxiety, and indeed fatigue. So we've all got two things in common as far as I can tell. We all have amazing, life-changing results from chiropractic care with our patients. But I would ask, what do we learn from that? Because we all know that it can be amazing for some people. And that's great. But ultimately, we also have people who don't respond in the way we want them to. So the question is, why don't they respond like the other ones did? And it just doesn't work. So for me, that's an opportunity for learning and improvement. The problem is it's all too easy, if they don't get the response or it's muted, to then just do the same thing again and again and again. So if everyone should respond, but everyone doesn't, the question is why? And we don't just want to repeat the same thing again and again and again and hope to get a different result. If they're coming back in, if the adjustments aren't holding, or they're not healing, or they're still in pain, regardless of how much functional change you get, we need to look at the why. And that's what we want to really consider. So why use the metabolic intervention? So we want my intervention, I want it to be sustainable. I want the range of movements I generate to consistently increase and to be consistent with the remodeling and healing. We talk about that a lot, and we have these charts showing a road to recovery and stuff, but the range of movement should be sustainable. If it's just dropping back every time between each visit, then it probably isn't. And then the pain should be consistent in the way it drops as you remodel and heal. If you have a normal nociceptive inputs and thresholds, then it should be in proportion to the amount of healing and function you improve. They should get proportional improvements in pain. Now then, when it comes to vitamin D, this is as easy as it's going to get. In general sort of nutritional terms, if you're not that well versed, this is as easy as it gets because it's in the public awareness. Everyone knows that vitamin D is an issue, and the NHS are recommending it. So the compliance from patients is very high. The supplements are very cheap. You get very quick results. So it's a very, very easy place to start. It's a low-hanging fruit, and this is why I often start with this lecture to get people going, because it means it's an easy way to get started. Now, this next slide really is going to tell us, as a sort of overview of everything I'm going to tell you over the next sort of 45 minutes. So vitamin D is a common cause of persistent pain and dysfunction, mood and behavioral problems, and fatigue. Again, I often use the word mood and behavior very specifically rather than just saying depression and anxiety, because depression and anxiety becomes a label. This actually tells us what's happening. Their mood is altered, their behavior is altered. It doesn't create a label and just becomes a disease per se. Now, a significant proportion of your neuromechanical pain patients are either deficient or insufficient, and we'll qualify what that means in a moment. But in particular, the really easy low-hanging fruit to go for in terms of really low deficiency rates are the people that are obese, people that have any kind of ethnicity other than Caucasian, and the elderly. These people are way high, as we'll see in the research, in terms of the deficiency rates. And then the treatment. So for most people, 5,000 units a day is going to do it, with the exception of people that are obese, because vitamin D is a fat and you store it in your fat, and that means there's less in the blood, and therefore you'll see in the research we'll show you later, you're going to need much higher levels in order to get a normal response. So that's really the crux of everything we're going to talk about. Now we're going to dig into a little bit more of the detail. But in terms of what I've just told you there, this isn't just me saying this from my point of view as someone who's into functional medicine and nutrition. The NHS now are recognizing that this is a real issue. So they're looking at anything in terms of risks for vitamin D. Look at the symptoms they're mentioning: chronic widespread pain, symmetric lower back pain, muscle aches and weaknesses. And they may look at waddling gait, difficulty getting up and down. Think about those old people getting in and out of chairs. They don't like going out in the sun. And when now if they do go out in the sun, their skin production is very poor of vitamin D. And then look also here, bone ache, lower back, pelvis, and the lower extremities. So this is now well recognized that this is an issue. So here's our roadmap. So we know that vitamin D deficiency, it will drive a sustained inflammatory response. And I think it's the last word that's key there. It's not just chronic inflammation, it's a response to something or because of something. In this case, vitamin D drives that systemic response. So you get blood-based inflammation running through your system, but that also then goes into the brain, through the blood-brain barrier, and everything activates, and then you get neuroinflammation right up in here. Now, inflammation creates a lot of free radicals, and that will ultimately create damage within your system, oxidative damage. So inflammation is the second biggest cause of free radicals in the body. The first is your mitochondria. So your mitochondria, that is your metabolism. So you have to have that running. Now, when you take food and you take it through your Krebs cycle, ultimately that's just a breaking of bonds, it's a releasing of electrons. So even with the most efficient mitochondria, you're going to get some free radical spill out. And as they become dysfunctional, because of poor diet, poor lifestyle, pollutions and toxins, they then become less efficient and they spill out even more free radicals. And the problem is those free radicals create more damage, and that creates inflammation, and that creates more damage and repeat. And that's why this is like the unholy triad. These three things are driving almost all health conditions you can name, from Alzheimer's and dementia, cancer, strokes, heart attacks. Inflammation, free radical damage, and dysfunctional mitochondria are at the root of it. And if you can get on top of some of these things, you're going to get massive changes. So, but our point of view as chiropractors, these three things then create a lowered pain threshold. They make your peripheral and central nervous system hypersensitive. So you might already have an issue, and it might hurt a little bit, and then it hurts a lot more. But it also creates this fibrotic connective tissue because the damage has to be healed, and that's fibrosis. That means the tissue becomes very prone to injury, and when you do injure it, you get very poor healing and recovery. And these things drive the symptoms here. Pain and stiffness that is persistent. So that'll mean the pain threshold is low as the pain is persistent. The dysfunction often is persistent because this connective tissue keeps binding up, and it reduces their range of motion, and then they lose the adjustments. Inflammation in and of itself can create mood and behavior problems. So well recognized now, inflammation is a very significant part of persistent depression. Well recognized within the research. And because your mitochondria are dysfunctional, you also get very fatigued. So the question then is, key clinical question, is my patient likely to be vitamin D deficient or insufficient? And if it is that deficiency or insufficiency directly causing the chief complaint? So that means, is the level of vitamin D so low that they've developed allodynia, meaning that they just have widespread pain when there's nothing actually wrong with them in terms of even function or any kind of tissue damage? Or, on a more subtle level, is it contributing to a dysfunctional metabolic system, which is then creating that sustained inflammatory response, which creates that hypersensitivity, and that will then highlight or exaggerate a latent neuromechanical dysfunction or connective tissue failure? So you think about, if you took anybody off the street, 100 people, and you measured them, they'd all, the vast majority are going to have something dysfunctional, but that doesn't always correlate with the pain level. Just because they have dysfunction doesn't mean they're going to have pain, and vice versa. They may have no dysfunction and lots of pain. Equally, you can have lots of people with torn discs, rotator cuff tears, labral tears in the hips, and they have no pain at all. That doesn't mean you shouldn't treat them, but if you flip it around, it means that if they have none of those things, but a very low pain threshold, then they're going to have a lot of pain, even for nothing really wrong with them. So let's take a look at the levels of vitamin D so we can clarify deficiency from insufficiency. So the NHS and general sort of standard medical stuff, anything under 50 is deficient. If you're under 25, that's generally, we report it back as grossly or severely deficient. Once you hit 50, then they'll always report it as normal or adequate or sufficient. Now, just bear in mind also that if you don't, you must always get the patient to get a copy of any blood test results, because you'll frequently get the receptionist telling them, oh, it's normal. And when you actually get the report, they'll be in the 40s. And as far as they're concerned, that's good enough and they're not too bothered. And also, if you're 51, they'll definitely report it as normal. And as we'll see later, that may or may not be good enough in terms of symptoms and function. So from our point of view, anything under 50 is deficient, but anything from 50 up to 85 nanomoles, we would call that insufficient. So I'm going to see why in a minute in terms of calcium absorption and other things. The optimal levels, we're looking at least 100. I like to keep it around 125, 150, maybe a little bit higher depending on the patient. You don't really want it above about 250. That's when it starts to get a bit beyond what would be considered a physiological normal response. So symptom-wise, if you're under 25 nanomoles, that's gross deficiency. These patients, they are always symptomatic, always. And the severity may vary, but they are going to know that there is something wrong with them. So they'll typically have muscle pain and stiffness, very broad areas. Almost looks a little bit like somebody who turns up with polymyalgia rheumatica, very, very broad, diffuse areas across the arms and shoulders. They get a dull ache in the lower back. It's often generalized or bilateral, and it's just there all the time. Now, it still might get worse with weight bearing, but often it's just a general ache, and it's kind of non-specific, and also doesn't get worse with anything particularly. They are absolutely exhausted, really, really, really tired, and they're well aware that it isn't normal. If you do muscle testing, they are absolutely feather weak. They just cannot muster a response whatsoever. And then mood. Often they'll be very, very flat, and they'll know they are. They often have a diagnosis of depression. And bear in mind, if you're very, very tired, you're going to lack any motivation to go and do anything. And often it's the fatigue that it leads them to the diagnosis of being depressed, because they lack motivation to go and do anything. Also, they will have seen, if they've seen anyone else for treatment, it won't have worked at all. So if they've seen another chiropractor or an osteopath or a physio, that's always a useful thing to look at. Now, it does depend. If they've just been to see this standard NHS physio, then that may not be what you call treatment necessarily if they've just done exercises. But just be aware that you don't let your ego get out of hand and decide that what they need is your particular blend of chiropractic. The ego is the enemy for all practitioners. You've got to rein it in and just make sure you're mindful of that. They may also have diagnosis of other things. So, for example, fibromyalgia is commonly misdiagnosed because of the aches and pains, because they're broad and all over the place. And we'll see some research in a moment that will show the changes. Chronic fatigue syndrome, again, because the pain and the fatigue and the depression. Actual diagnosis of these things. They may have been to the pain clinic and been told it's all in their head, aka central hypersensitivity, and that kind of is right, although they get the wrong idea. Growing pains in children, very common. Failure to thrive or developmental delay when they're very young. And then there may just be a very grumpy teenager. I've seen some very grumpy teenagers become quite normal, nice people when we got their vitamin D levels up to normal. So here's one piece of research that almost sounds too easy. that there can be this one thing that can do all these amazing things, but it's through that power of inflammation affecting the mitochondria and the damage. So just take a look at the research here. I'm not going to cover lots of research in this, but there's a couple of key bits that I think are really worth looking at. So this was a study of people with chronic widespread pain and included people with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. So anyone under 62 nanomoles, so that's people in this insufficiency and then down into deficiency, they were included. And they gave them, it was 50,000 a week, but it averages out about 7,000 units, 7,100 units a day. And then they measured visual pain scale. They gave them osteoesthery, disability and pain, all that kind of stuff. And they also measured depression and vitality and all these kind of general sort of health and wellness markers. And let's take a look. This is 3 months from before and after. So pain scale went from 7.4 average to 3.9. That's a 47% drop in pain in 3 months. Now, there's lots of research on other medications and chiropractic. They get nowhere near 47% pain drop. They'll have some kind of statistically significant drop, but nothing like that, almost halving of the pain. So if you're going to do it, you're going to give them vitamin D on the first visit to make sure that you get them started and the pain starts to drop as you're doing your chiropractic care. If you just treat them and you miss this, you're not going to get a response because the pain is going to be so high. They're going to get that muscle guarding and protection, and it's going to make their treatment very, very slow. Note also, they had a 35% drop in their depression and a 77% increase in vitality. And that's just one nutrient, and that was it. And they may have other things as well. And that's why I think if you combine what we do as chiropractors and that neuromechanical system, you know how powerful that is. And you just understand there are some key nutrients like vitamin D and B12 and certain other things when you know what you're looking for. And all of a sudden, those things come together, and then your chiropractic work that much more consistently and sustainably. If you miss this, these people just simply will not get better. It doesn't matter how much you adjust them. It doesn't matter how many drugs they take for depression. It is not going to get better. Okay, patients now between 25 and 50. So they're still deficient, but it isn't quite so severe. So they're still symptomatic usually, but it's on a more subtle level. And they're not always aware of it. They have low-grade aches and pains, still broad, still non-specific, not quite as severe. These are the ones that are slightly hard to pick up because they'll often have an existing issue that's just been highlighted. So they might have, you know, some kind of dysfunction in the lower back. As the pain threshold drops down, it starts to kind of poke up more and more and more, and then it starts to hurt more. So when you examine them, it looks, and it is, a regional neuromechanical dysfunction. But when you adjust them, they start to improve, and then it plateaus. They just stop halfway along. They just stop getting the pain maintains, and then the dysfunction, you can't get any lower. That's much harder to pick up than the ones under 25 nanomoles because they obviously have this kind of broad diffuse pain that doesn't fit mechanical presentation. The fatigue and the mood, that will be mild to moderate depending on the patient. They're not always aware that they're tired because they don't really know what normal is. That's a relative thing. It's not till you give them it and they're on the other side and then they suddenly perk up and become quite different people. And they may have, of course, seen other people, and once again, they'll have had some treatment, and they'll say something like, yeah, it did help a bit, and then it seemed to stop working, or it didn't really last very long. They just kind of came back again. So here's a piece of research. This is on growing pains, and I put this in because the average level in the blood is 33. So that's deficient, but it's not grossly deficient. Under 25, that's into rickets territory. Here at 33, deficiency of children with growing pains. And just out of interest, look at the dosing they give people here. If they were over 6 years old, they gave them 300,000 units. And they do these bolus doses because it means they get compliance. So they ask them to take a supplement. The compliance is poor. But it's an enormous dose. And then at the end of the study, they had 111 nanomoles. That's prime into the really, really good level. And that's what we want to see in research with vitamin D. You must measure before, make sure they're deficient, and then measure after to make sure you got them in the good zone. It's very common in research that shows that vitamin D doesn't work for various things. They haven't even tested them at the beginning to see if they're deficient. They just give everyone a generic dose and see what happens. Take a look at the changes in the pain levels. So previous 6.8 down to 2.9, a 57% reduction in pain over a 3-month period, and they did one thing. The residue there is going to be maybe other nutritional stuff and, of course, dysfunctional stuff that as chiropractors, we should be all over. Again, very powerful. One simple thing. In 20 years of practice, I've seen one child with growing pains I couldn't resolve. And I think there was something a bit weird going on with her behavior between her and her mum. So it's very, very powerful stuff. Now then, when you get above 50, the NHS lose interest, but we need to know this stuff. So this is insufficient. You must always get the lab test results from the GP or get the patient to get the lab test results. Now, the reason that we say this is insufficient is because of calcium absorption. So what they've done is they've taken groups of patients with an average of 50 nanomoles and then averages of 86, and they're given the same calcium dose. In the group who had the higher levels of vitamin D, they got an extra 65% calcium out of the supplement. So that's, if you're young and growing and trying to lay down bone density, if you're osteoporotic, that is a massive amount of calcium. It's enormous. So we always want to be looking for optimal. For us, optimal is going to be over 100, and that we're going to guarantee the calcium absorption as well as some other immune system benefits we're going to cover. Now, between 50 and 85, they're not usually wildly symptomatic unless they have a vitamin D receptor defect. Now, you're not going to know that, but the issue here is that, where is the optimal level? How are we going to avoid this? I've seen a guy who had levels of around 55, 60, and he was absolutely crippled with pain, couldn't walk up and down stairs in his late 60s. Within a month, he was back walking on doing walking holidays. And so you can't always predict. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what is actually optimal, and we're going to mimic what you'd get if you lived in a sunny climate. So we know roughly between 100 and 200 is the levels that people get who live in sunny climates and have exposure all the time. There's also some very good epidemiological and some randomized studies to show that if you get into the 100 to 200 range, you get a significant drop in cancers, in heart attack, strokes, MS, and basically causes of all death, excluding trauma, all tend to drop fairly dramatically when you get up into above 100 levels, 100 nanomoles. And you can see here, this is a study of people living in sunny climates and outdoors a lot. And you can see the levels here. When your body has made enough, it simply turns production off, so you can't become toxic from your own vitamin D. So we want to mimic what you'd get if you lived in a sunny climate all year round. Obviously, because of living in England, where I do, between October and April, you simply can't make vitamin D whatsoever. Now, if you want to measure vitamin D, here in England, there's a very easy, there's an online source here, vitamindtest.org.uk. It's £29. It's a finger prick test, very easy to do. I would just make you aware that their reference range, when they return the value to the patient, you should make sure the patient is aware they need to bring the levels into you so you can tell, you can interpret it for them, because their reference ranges are set very, very low. And so often when they're at a level that we've been interested in, the patient thinks they're fine. So always get them to bring it in. The interpretation chart that I showed you before, that's as part of the handout you'll get when you sign up on the website. And then also as part of that, you can get this chart. So if you do get a blood test value, and then you can use this as a dosing chart. So that's where they are now, depending on where you are. And then you pick where you want to go to, and then you just correlate along there. And that's the level you're going to use if you want to get up to that particular point. So making vitamin D, you need sunshine, and it needs to be a UV of 3 and above, and it hits the skin. And you can't have any lotion on. The whole point of lotion, obviously, is it blocks the UV rays, and therefore it will block the production of vitamin D. It hits your skin, and it turns a form of cholesterol into vitamin D3, and that's the form that you make in your skin that you get through supplements. It then goes to your liver, and then it tweaks it chemically, and it's this form, the 25-OHD3, that's the one that the blood test measures. Now, that is inactive. It doesn't do anything. So we measure that one. It comes into the kidneys, and the kidneys turn it on. That becomes active, and that is what allows you to absorb calcium. Now, what happens is, if you are low in calcium because you haven't got enough vitamin D, the blood level of calcium is monitored, and when it's detected to be low, your parathyroid hormone says we can't have that, and it will tell the bone to release its reservoir of calcium, and then you just gently release calcium from your bone into the blood. And that's why measuring calcium levels for vitamin D is pretty much pointless, because you're always going to buffer your blood levels by releasing bone calcium. And that's why long-term vitamin D deficiency leads to osteoporosis, because you're always going to have to maintain calcium levels in the blood to maintain your nervous system at a normal, healthy state. But the real magic that happens with vitamin D actually happens inside of your cells, not the kidneys. So as well as going to the kidneys, the vitamin D goes into all of your cells of your digestive tract, your bone, your ovaries, your brain, your muscles, everywhere. And inside of there, you turn it on. And it's at this point that vitamin D becomes magical from what we're interested in particularly. It's anti-inflammatory, it regulates cell growth, it's good for your mental health, for blood pressure, and it's very good for your immune system, which means it's very good for immune prevention, which at the moment I think is a pretty hot topic. So let's just take a look at a little bit of research on that. So this is in the BMJ. Now this is a big meta-analysis. Now just bear in mind that these meta-analyses, they're very good in the sense that they try and clump the stuff together. But like I said, in a lot of research studies, they don't actually measure if you're deficient. And if you're not deficient, you're not going to benefit by being given supplements. And of these 25 studies, I think only 19 of them actually even bothered to measure vitamin D. So even though the results are that it was safe and it protected against acute respiratory tract infections, it says here the patients who were very deficient and those not receiving bolus doses got the most benefit. Obviously, if you're not deficient, you're not going to get any benefit. And therein lies the problem with a lot of the research. But regardless, this is where we should be going. And in fact, there is certainly a theory that says that the reason we have flu epidemics in the winter is because our immunity drops because of vitamin D deficiency. So this is a free download. You can grab this one online. They're asking the question, why is flu both seasonal and ubiquitous? Where is the virus between epidemics? And they're saying the flu virus is always in circulation, always there. But why does it only pop up at certain times of the year? And their suggestion is that because vitamin D has a profound effect on your innate immunity, that it protects you during periods when you're high, and as your levels drop down, you become vulnerable, and then it gets you. They also have a very interesting line here about what they call good infectors. What they mean is people with healthy, robust immune systems getting the flu, they don't really feel anything, they can deal with it, but they will spread it to other people. And that is one of the arguments about the current COVID-19 issue, is we may have huge numbers of people that have had it, because it's been in circulation since late last year, early this year, don't know they've got it, but they're spreading it around. Okay, skin production. So we know you need UV3 and above. So in real terms, that means, in England at least, between, you can only make it between about April and September. So from September, October until about March, April, you simply cannot make any, you have to supplement. Even then in the summer, between April and September, it must be between 11 and 3. And there's a general rule of thumb, I tell patients, if your shadow is shorter than you are, you can make vitamin D. And if it's longer than you are, then you can't make it. Because people get confused, they think they can go out at 6 in the evening and make lots of vitamin D, and they can't. They have to be out in the midday sun, and of course you can't have any lotion on. So one exposure where you get a little bit pink, these are called a minimal erythemal dose. You can make up to about 20,000 units. That's a huge dose. Remember, the recommended daily allowance in the UK currently is 200. And we can make 20,000. This means that 200 is just not a physiologically meaningful dose whatsoever. Now, you want to be getting at least 25% of skin out, more if you can get it. And you want to aim for about a third to a half of the time that you would normally be getting pink. You don't want to get pink because that's burning. You want a little bit of it without showing any pinkness. Now, for most people, that's between 20 and 30 minutes, depending on skin tone. And then you should lotion up, cover up, or sit in the shade, generally speaking. So remember, no lotion. Anything above factor 30, it blocks 99% of all vitamin D. It's very important to remind patients this. They have a thought, oh, I'll go out in the midday sun, but they have this bee in their bonnet about suntan lotion. They just can't let it go. So you just need to let them know. Obviously, at the moment, going out in the sun is not very popular. It turns out you're an idiot if you want to try and improve your immunity and look after yourself so we can create herd immunity, you'd be some kind of a COVID idiot, apparently, and they're going to arrest you for going out in the sun as you want to. All right, here's this is just showing the response of your skin production. So there's a 10,000 unit dose given orally. And then look here, this is 1 MED. So that's going a little bit pink. And look, that's higher than a 10,000 unit dose. There's a 25,000 oral dose. It just shows you how powerful your skin is. But despite everything we've said, some people they just can't get their heads around it, and they're scared, particularly when there's children involved. So if they can't do that, just tell them to take supplements all year round, and they have to just deal with it, because otherwise it becomes too complicated for them. So our clinical questions: is my patient vitamin D deficient or insufficient? So we always consider the time of year, because obviously in the winter the rates are going to go up dramatically. Then also consider if they're a little bit obese. Are they anything other than Caucasian, and are they elderly? Once you get past about 60 to 70, you don't produce much. The other thing just to bear in mind, even if they're white and very fair-skinned, they have the potential to make lots of vitamin D. However, people that are very fair-skinned often are very, very diligent with the sun factor stuff. So they'll often be covered in factor 50 before they go out. So just because they're white, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not deficient. It just means you just got to dig into whether they're very diligent with the suntan lotion. So this is the research in terms of actual levels. So in the middle of winter, across the whole of the UK, if you include anything under 75, which would be deficient and insufficient, you're looking at nearly 90% of the entire population. Now, that's a pandemic right there. And we said that the rates of cancer and strokes and heart disease and death of all cause drop dramatically when you get above 100, 125. If you want to save lives, just dish out some supplements and tell everyone to get out in the sun, because that's the easiest thing we will ever do. And it goes in line with our evolutionary history. And even in the middle of summer, the rates in the middle of summer drop to 60%, but that's still over half the population and nowhere near where they ought to be. And that, for me, is a public health crisis of very, very significant proportions. Note also here that the prevalence of deficiency was markedly high in the obese, regardless of the season, and also that in anyone of the non-white population group there, the deficiency rates was 100% across the board. So if you have, I don't have, I'm in Southampton, most of my patients are Caucasian. I have a small group of Asian people I see. Anyone who's not white, they are deficient all year round, every single time. And particularly my slightly elder Asian patients, they get quite obese. They are grossly deficient and wildly pro-inflammatory, particularly with the diet often is very, very heavy in the omega-6s. So just consider our evolutionary ancestry here. Look at it through the lens of evolution. There's the equator. Anything above 37 degrees, if you live above 37, is considered a, quote, risk factor for vitamin D deficiency. We live at 51. Now look, that's the bottom of Russia's there, into Canada. So we have a real issue. If your ethnicity, this chap here, is somewhere from the Afro-Caribbean area, then if you move up to England, you have a problem. Just from an evolutionary point of view, it's just not going to work. You're going to have to supplement. And that's why people who are very, very fair, like she may well be from, say, northern Finland or northern Sweden, they make tons of it because evolutionarily they had to evolve and change so they can make vitamin D, because without it, they wouldn't survive. This is the risk factor for the elderly people. Look, this is a sun exposure, 1 minimal erythemal dose. That again, they went pink. And look, here's young people, lots of vitamin D. And there's the elderly, just not much happening whatsoever. Obesity, as I said, it's a fat vitamin D, so you store it in your fat. And if it's in your fat, it's not there in the blood, and therefore you're going to be more deficient than people who are leaner. So our clinical questions: is my patient likely to be vitamin D deficient or insufficient, and is it going to be directly causing their chief complaint? That is the one thing. If they're below 25, it's going to be the silver bullet. The one thing that's going to make the massive difference, that's going to change their lives. The only way you can tell is restore their vitamin D levels and assess the response. You may wish to test or just go straight with the supplements, but you just got to get the levels up and see what happens. And it's the same if you think that it's contributing to that general inflammatory system. If their pain threshold is dropped, It's one bit of a jigsaw. It may not be the only thing. They may have a whole other stuff, and they may need lots of good quality chiropractic care, but it's one bit of it. So if you're going to do it on the first visit, because you want to start things to get their symptoms dropping, inflammation dropping, and then to also get their energy up and to improve their mood as well. So if you don't have a blood test, that's fine. I used to do a lot more testing than I do now. Because I understand the research, I know in the middle of winter, the deficiency rates are 90%. And also I should point out, in the research on patients with musculoskeletal, aches and pains, all that kind of stuff, the rates of deficiency go up even higher. So I'm pretty happy that generally they're mostly deficient. So I do most of my treatment without testing these days, unless they're particularly interested. So do it on the first visit. I give most of them 5,000 a day. If they have really severe symptoms, I will give them a loading dose. So I'll just give them 100,000 units, and I have a bottle of liquid in my office, and I will just pipette out 2 pipettefuls straight into their mouth. That's 100,000 straight in, bang. And because it's a fat, it stays in the system. It's not like vitamin C or something that's water soluble that will come out again. That will stay in the system. It's like an injection. And then I'll give them 10,000 daily for a month, and then I'll reduce it depending on how they're getting on. You tend to get much quicker responses that way. Within days or weeks, usually within days, you'll see them coming up, the energy comes up, and the change in their personality can be really, really quite pronounced. Now, the obesity thing, this is the one thing that is really not understood and is missed and leads to deficiency persisting. So this is 5,000 units given to people. The bottom line, this is people who are obese, and this is people that are healthy size. So you can see there's a big difference in the response to the same dose. So if you want to get them up to a decent level, remember here they're not wildly deficient here, they're sort of 50, maybe 60, 70. If they're down here, then you're going to not get them out of the zone you need to get them healthy. Look at the difference there. So this is 5,000. If you want to mimic that in someone obese, you're going to have to give them 2 to 3 times the dose of someone that is lean. So that needs to be reflected then in your prescribing. So my recommendations are, if they're about 3 stone over, I would add on an extra 2,000 or 3,000 units. If they're 5 stone or more overweight, I tend to just double the dose and just push it up a little bit higher. And I've seen a number of patients where that's been the one thing that stopped them getting well, because the lack of understanding about the response to dosing was missed. Now, poor compliance. This is generally an issue in children, teenagers, and men. Often just don't like taking supplements and are a bit grumpy about the whole thing. So if you have any of that, just simply give them a weekly dose. We saw in the research before, you can give them 300,000 in one hit. So I just say, give them a weekly dose, and I just say 5,000 a day. So just times it by 7, give them 35,000 once a week, shove it in there, and then they're going to get the dose they need. The only other issues to consider are malabsorption. If they have bypass surgery, they're on a very strong acid inhibitor, or they have a known history of inflammatory bowel disease, you may wish to give them a sublingual tablet. You just stick it between the cheek and the gum. It goes into the bloodstream, and that then avoids any issues in terms of malabsorption. The other thing just be aware of is patients will often say, oh, I already take vitamin D or supplements. Be very, very specific, because they'll often be taking something from Tesco's or Asda or somewhere crap. Is it vitamin D on its own? Is it part of a multi? You need to check the dose, because often it will be something like this: 5 or 10 micrograms. That's 200 units. That's 400 units. We're giving 5,000 units. Remember, you can make 20,000 in half an hour of sunbathing. So 200 units is just, from a physiological point of view, is meaningless. All right, there's the chart you can use. If you do have a blood test result, you can then use the chart, which you can get as a download. When it comes to safety, there's a kind of a medical hysteria that envelops certain people. Not quite so much the medical doctors, the nurses seem to have something, they hear about this. It is a fat, so it stays in your body. Now, it isn't toxic itself, but it can lead to hypercalcemia. There's too much calcium in the blood. But it's very rare, and there's no link with kidney stones. That's the other one that you'll commonly hear, is that it can cause kidney stones. Now, this is from a study, 48 studies combined, nearly 20,000 patients, no obvious risk of kidney stone increases. Now, I'm not saying it never happens, but on a general thing, there's no increased risk per se. Safety-wise, there have been reports of toxicity, but they're usually people taking over 40,000 units a day and for quite protracted periods. So 10,000 units a day has been shown to be safe long-term, no problem. The only other thing to consider is sarcoidosis. Yeah, I wouldn't give it to anyone with sarcoidosis. I did it once. Luckily, it was my brother, but I didn't know he had sarcoidosis at the time. But he wasn't well, and he hasn't forgotten it since. So if you know they have sarcoidosis, just don't give it to them. Just leave it. It's not worth the risk or the bother, frankly. All right, so clinical information, just a summary here. Remember, you want to correlate their symptoms. Have they got persistent pain? Is it broad, diffuse? Do they have other things, mood and behavioral stuff, non-response to other treatments? Are they tired a little bit? And then think about the time of year, think about how obese they are, their skin tone, think about how old they are, and then go in there, because this is as easy as it gets. If you can generate 50, 60% drop in pain, depression, improve the vitality with one single nutrient, they're going to thank you for it. And when you see people that are really, really deficient, it's remarkable that they literally change personality. They come back in with some zing about them talking. It's really, really amazing. So there's our summary slide. Pain, that's persistent and dysfunction, mood and behavior fatigue, check the risk factors, and then get out there and start supplementing. If they're a bit chunky, give them some extra, double it up, and go for it. Okay, I think that's everything I have to say. I don't want to take some, is there some Q&A we want to go over?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Simon. I think we've had more questions asked on this webinar than we have on any other one we've held so far, which I think is a sign of just how well you get information across. So if it's okay with you, we do want to just go through a couple of questions, if that's all right?
Yeah.
So there are a few here that we'll go through in the Q&A box. There's a couple in the chat as well, which I'll just bring up. First one is, why does the NHS recommend 400 IU and state toxic above this level? How do you approach this or manage this with GPs when their recommendations might be different to your own?
So I just tell the patient, you can make 20,000 units in half an hour. That's a fact. And 400 units is not physiologically meaningful. It won't get a deficiency. And if there's any debate about it, £29 answers the debate. You can test their level and then make sure you explain to them again, we don't want you not deficient. We want you optimal. I want your blood levels to look like someone that lives in Florida. And I want them at 125. And also, there is also a chart available from Grassroots Health, which is a vitamin D charity. We have it in reception, and it's basically as your blood levels goes up, it shows the drop in cancers and heart disease and strokes, and you can see it. Like breast cancer drops like a stone when you get to about 125. So, and the idea of toxicity, again, it's just nonsense when you're dealing with the levels we're giving. It doesn't make any sense. There is a kind of a hysteria that medics get about it, which is it's not evidence-based, and it's kind of historical paranoia.
Brilliant, brilliant. Next question here, Simon, is will you please comment on K2 with VIT-D to increase absorption clinical picture?
Yep. So you don't need. It's not for absorption. That's someone else said that. I don't know why that is. It's more to do with. It's to do with when you get the calcium into your system, then you want to make sure the calcium goes into your connective tissues, and vitamin K2 activates the protein osteocalin in your bone, and that sucks the calcium in, and it improves your bone density. So that's part of my osteoporosis protocols and stuff we do on the course. And generally, I tend to give vitamin D with K2 built in, and not always. If you have a good gut microbiome, you can make plenty of K2. It's just that not lots of people have that particularly. So general rule of thumb, yes, I would give it for the most part, but it's not to do with absorption of the vitamin D. It's to do with calcium going into the bones and not going into your arteries.
Cool. A couple questions have all centered around this is, what are your recommendations for brands, or what is kind of best to use?
For a legal reason, I can't recommend brands because I used to be involved with a nutritional company, so I have a legally binding agreement that I can't recommend brands. So I can tell you, and you can tell them at some point. Let me type something in here. So yeah. There's that one. Hang on, I spelled that wrong. They do good stuff. And then They're okay. There's a whole load of stuff. It's not hard to make vitamin D, so it's not that hard to find good stuff. You just got to find. Don't let them buy it in Tesco's or Holland and Barrett. There's lots of good ones out there. Most of them are combining vitamin D with K2 now anyway, so it's not that hard to find. The key is the dose, is getting the dose. It's best to find a tablet that's like 5,000 with K2 built in, and then you can just, give it one a day rather than give them a whole handful of stuff.
Great.
I can tell you actually, if you go to, there's two websites I can recommend, naturaldispensary.co.uk and Amrita Nutrition, AMRITA nutrition.co.uk. Both of those are holding companies. They hold loads of different brands. So that's why I send my patients to, when I'm doing my online consulting, they hold loads of good brands. And when your patient rings them up, then they will say, who's your practitioner? And they say, it's Connor Ward. And then they get put under your account. You get 20% back off of everything they spend with Natural Dispensary and Amrita. And they won't let you buy without telling you who your practitioner is. And then they keep buying from them, you keep making their retained income, and they're getting good quality supplements. And if you don't want to get the percentage, you can set your account that brings the percentage down to 10% or 0%, and they get your discount. So you can do it either way.
Cool. A couple of questions here in terms of taking it in a tablet form or something like in a spray or sublingual.
Yeah, so if you got, I have sublinguals we use and liquid and spray. It doesn't really matter unless they have a digestive issue. It's not really that much of a bigger deal. I don't think it's generally necessary. So I'm slightly ambivalent about it. Really, I use liquid and tablets and sublinguals. If they have if you have someone with digestive issue, then you'll have to do a sublingual. But it's not the biggest issue because it's not that hard to absorb.
Okay. And then lastly, Simon, just because we want to be respectful of your time, do you have a vitamin D chart that you use for kids, teenagers, like pre-teens?
A brand I use?
No, a level, like your...
Oh, a level. Oh, I see. It's a sliding scale because it's size dependent. So it's so babies, so kids, toddlers, like 1,000 units. As they get bigger, becomes 2,000. By the time they get to become teenagers, they're pretty much adult sizes. So then, for me, I take 5,000. My wife probably needs a little bit less, maybe 4,000. It's purely size dependent. If they go to my, I'm pretty sure my website, I did a whole series on vitamin D. I did it on pregnancy and pediatrics. And I'm pretty sure it's available on the website under lessons. I post all my newsletters and they get put onto the website. If you go back a month or two, I think it will be on there and they can download that. I go through all the dosing on there.
Cool. Brilliant. Simon, we've got a load more questions that
I'm happy to stay. It's fine. I can stay.
So we want to make sure that we don't take up too much of your time, but
it's all right.
Someone has mentioned here, Chris Kresser has recently retracted his advice on taking high-dose Vit D during the COVID pandemic because of some research that suggests that it may increase ACE2 receptor expression.
Yeah.
Any thoughts or?
Yeah. So what that means is that there's a nuance to this. When I have, if I can feel a flu coming on or a cold, I will do a high-dose vitamin D and high-dose vitamin A, and that's very effective. In this, the issue is, you're right, it's to do with this thing called ACE2, which is the enzyme, and vitamin D will increase ACE2, and that's how your coronavirus gets in. It's very unusual in that respect. Most viruses can't get in through that, so it can increase it. But that doesn't mean you don't want to take it, because the biggest risk factor for getting it or getting an infection is low vitamin D, as we discussed. So yeah, I wouldn't take a high dose with it, but I would take vitamin D every day if I wasn't getting sunshine exposure. But there's a difference between not taking a high dose and not taking any, or not getting sun exposure. So make sure your levels are optimal, but don't take any kind of massive doses.
Okay, brilliant.
And again, that's in the, I think that I said that now, didn't I? The COVID, I did a supplement thing for COVID-19, I think, as well.
Yeah, you did an antiviral post, I think, which I was actually just reading this morning, and I did tag the link to that in the chat, guys.
Yeah.
So I know in that newsletter, you kind of went through your top supplements and recommendations during the COVID kind of period. And I will say it's a really easy reading and really insightful. And of course, it's all evidence-based and kind of all the links to the research are there as well. So it's a great resource for you to use to help with patients and clients too, guys.
And if anyone can't find anything, they can always just email me and I can send them a link or attach stuff to them as well. It's not a problem.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to find the question that I wanted to ask you next. So once you've started vitamin D supplementation here, Simon, how often would you retest and when would you stop dose, if ever?
So if you're going to retest, do it you need to wait about 3 months to get a good look at it. And then stopping, in the summer, I always encourage them to get sunshine because there's something magical about sunshine on your body. It has more just than just vitamin D, and it produces a particular form of vitamin D, the sulfated form. So in the summer, I always say try and get sunshine, and if you do, don't take any you get a big dose. Don't take any for at least a few days, and if it's great weather, great. You just got to keep reminding them they can't wear lotion and make vitamin D. So when we go with the kids, I let them get half an hour of sun, and then I cover them up or lotion them up. So that's the only time I stop is if they're getting natural sun exposure.
Okay. And then, Simon, I think what we'll do is we'll finish off on just this last one is any contraindications in terms of medications or other health conditions that we need to be aware of when recommending vitamin D?
No, just sarcoidosis is the main one. I think that's the main one. Nothing else specifically. It should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be fine.
Good. And then, Simon, I just wanted to ask one question because I know it was something that you covered at the lines, and I just thought your answer to it was brilliant. A lot of chiropractors will say, I don't really want to do the nutrition stuff. I know that was something that you kind of had a really strong opinion on, and I think it would be a really helpful thing for guys to hear. So if you could just kind of cover your opinion on that.
So when I've been off lecturing, every now and again, I'll do my thing, and then someone else will stand up on stage and they'll say something like, I really like Simon's talk, but for me, I just want to adjust. I just want to adjust. I refer out for nutrition. And when I first heard that, I was like, yeah, okay. That seems reasonable. And then I thought about it and I realized that's not reasonable at all. And the reason is that you won't know that you need to refer out for nutrition unless you know this stuff. So for example, if you take metformin, which is the diabetes drug, it stops your body absorbing vitamin B12. And as vitamin B12 drops down, you become depressed, you become tired, you get pain, a whole lot of other stuff. Unless you knew that, you wouldn't know that you needed to send out. So unless you're going to send every single patient that walks through the door off for nutrition, you are going to miss tons of stuff, tons of it, and they won't get better, and they will drop out. And it doesn't matter how much you scream innate or wellness or subluxation at them, they come to you for a reason, and you better honor that reason. And you're going to give them what they want, and then you're going to educate them about what they need. But they're never going to take you up on your offer of long-term care and other health benefits that you can provide unless you address why they came in the first place. So just saying I want to adjust, it's willful ignorance. It's like giving yourself a get out of jail card to be ignorant. And I've got no time for it whatsoever. And we all know that with BJ and DD, it's all about trauma, toxicity, and thoughts. It's the triad of health. And you can't ignore any of it. And you have to understand, and we live in a world now that is polluted beyond belief, stressed out with toxic, the worst diet. BJ Palm used to do hole-in-one. Good luck with that now, because they're so unwell. People are getting iller and iller and iller. And you can see the world healthcare is changing with functional medicine. It has become massive. 2007, when I started doing this a bit more detail, in functional medicine, and I had ankylosing spondylitis and psoriasis, and I started changing my diet and manipulating my gut microbiome and stool testing, all this kind of stuff. I was like some weird, crazy person who was fermenting vegetables and drinking off milk or whatever it was, right? I'm mainstream now. I can walk into Tesco's and buy kombucha. It's crazy. Everyone knows that the gut-brain axis is not like a weird thing anymore. So it is changing, and you can't just be the guy, well, I don't think you can be the guy that just lays people in a room and just wants to whack them and then not listen to the patient saying, well, I'm not any better. Like, if you did a good job, you should measure something meaningful, reassess it, it should be better, and it should stay, and it should improve. And if it doesn't, there might be a reason why, but you want to go looking for it. You can't just keep doing the same thing and pretending that it's all okay. And I think I said at the talk, often I think we've lost our integrity in terms of our results as chiropractors, not our identity. And I think it's driven by people that are no longer in practice telling us from their stage, you should do it this way. And I think often they burn themselves out seeing too many people, and doing it in not a very good way. And that's why they make their money, by telling you how to do it now. And I think we've lost it. I feel we've lost our integrity on that, from that point of view. We used to always be patient-centered and all about results, you know, and now we're all about how many times can I get them to come in? Like, what's my PVA? Like, that's not a good thing. I understand why from a business point of view and from an education point of view, but you should be selling results, not theory. That's what I think we should be doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, again, thank you just for putting that across so eloquently and so passionately. I think it's one of the reasons why you were, you know, as we said a couple of times before, a crowd favorite at the Lions this year. So, Simon, I know we've spoken a little bit about your core concepts course that's coming up, and you've kind of said to me that it's like a distillation of like current best practice, functional medicine practices that have been brought down into kind of a way in a playing field that chiropractors can utilize and use in practice.
Yeah.
So I know you said that's coming out hopefully in the summer, just for those guys who missed the beginning of the call, but potentially a little bit earlier if we can kind of get things.
Yeah. So I'm still about 60-ish% through it, and I'm just running. And I was going to finish it, take this opportunity now to finish it off. And then I just thought, given the current situation, if I can take the feedback I've got and redo it, what I'll do is I will do a sort of a, I'll knock 20% off the course price, but with the understanding that when you get it delivered in the next week or two, it's about 60-ish% ready, 70% ready, and then the rest of the 20-30% I'll deliver within the next 2 or 3 months, and I'll knock a bit off the price and put a handful of people through, as I've done last summer. I took a group of people through and kind of I've been drip feeding them the stuff. So if I do that, I'll send it out on the newsletter. If not, then it will be in the summer. And then yeah, it's very much it's for chiropractic. It's not a nutrition course. I'm not going to teach you about every vitamin, every mineral, because that's not, you can do that elsewhere. That's not what it's about. It's very specific to getting chiropractic care to work and sustainably hold and change, and knowing which ones come up again and again. And things like B12, for example.
Yeah.
These things, and vitamin D, they hold very unique positions within your physiology, your metabolic system. If you go down on if those go down, that you can't make myelin, for example, in B12. If you can't make myelin, you have got a problem. And it doesn't matter how many times you adjust them, you can have a problem. And there's a small number of those ones that really influence our care and the way they respond.
Yeah. Simon, once again, just thank you so much.
Pleasure.
We've got loads of questions that we still haven't gone through yet, but what I'll do is, if it's okay, can I send you an email?
Yeah.
And then, guys, what we'll do is we'll post the responses to those questions in the Facebook group. So please keep an eye out for them. We would love to, have someone on for 2 or 3 hours, but we've all got stuff to get on with and stuff to do. But again, Simon, from our side, on behalf of Connor and I, just thanks so much.
Pleasure.
I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Yes, Simon, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, sir.
Okay, well, Lions, we've got Alex Vidan coming up on Friday. We hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.